The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as a lone rider approached the town of Redemption. Dust kicked up beneath his horse's hooves, the only sound breaking the evening stillness. Eli Thorne sat tall in the saddle, his weathered face a map of hard years and harder choices. His eyes, once bright with promise, now carried the dullness of a man who'd seen too much and forgotten how to care. The main street stretched before him, a collection of wooden buildings faded by sun and neglect. A tumbleweed rolled lazily across his path as Eli guided his horse toward the hitching post outside the Crossroads Saloon. The familiar sight of the peeling paint and crooked sign brought no comfort, just the promise of whiskey and temporary oblivion. As he dismounted, his bones aching with emotion, a sound cut through the quiet, high-pitched and desperate. A baby's cry. Eli paused, one foot still in the stirrup, and turned toward the noise. It came again, louder this time, seeming to echo off the empty street. Something in that cry reached into his chest and squeezed, reminding him of things best left buried. Eli tied his horse and adjusted his worn hat, pushing the sound from his mind. He hadn't come to town for anything but whiskey and solitude. The saloon doors creaked as he pushed them open, stepping from the dying light into the amber glow of oil lamps. The Crossroads Saloon looked the same as it had for the past decade. A long bar stretching along one wall, scarred tables scattered across warped floorboards, and the perpetual haze of smoke hanging in the air. A few patrons hunched over their drinks, lost in their own miseries. No one looked up as Eli entered. No one ever did. He made his way to the bar, his spurs jingling with each step. The bartender, Mac, a burly man with forearms like tree trunks, nodded in recognition. The usual Eli? Eli nodded, placing a few coins on the bar. His hands were calloused and stained, the hands of a man who'd worked hard his whole life with little to show for it. Max slid a bottle of whiskey across the bar, not bothering with a glass. They both knew Eli wouldn't need one. Taking the bottle, Eli found his regular corner table and sat with his back to the wall, facing the door, an old habit from younger, more dangerous days. He uncorked the bottle and took a long pull, welcoming the familiar burn down his throat. The whiskey dulled the edges of his memories, made the ghosts a little quieter. 57 years had carved deep lines into Eli's face. His once dark hair had gone gray at the temples, and his beard was more salt than pepper. He'd been drifting for 15 years now, ever since leaving behind a wife and daughter in Montana. The memory of their faces had blurred with time, but the weight of his abandonment remained sharp as ever. Home was now a dilapidated cabin a mile outside of town, a place to sleep and nothing more. Redemption was just another stop in a long line of nowhere towns where he'd washed up, stayed a while, then moved on when the past started catching up. The whiskey bottle was a quarter empty when the saloon doors burst open. A woman stumbled in, clutching something to her chest. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and her dark hair fell in tangles around a face both beautiful and terrified. The bundle in her arms squirmed and let out a cry, the same one Eli had heard outside. Every head in the place turned toward her. She stood frozen for a moment, wild eyes scanning the room until they landed on Eli. Something in her gaze shifted, a decision made in desperation. She hurried toward his table. "Please," she said, voice breaking. "I need help." Eli stared at her, then at the bundle. A tiny face peeked out from the blankets, red and scrunched with displeasure. "I ain't the helping kind," he said, taking another swig from his bottle. The woman glanced nervously toward the door. "He'll kill me if he finds me. Please, just listen." Eli said nothing, but he didn't tell her to leave either. She slid into the chair across from him, adjusting the baby in her arms. "My name is Clara," she said. "This is Lila, my husband." Her voice faltered. "He's not a good man. He drinks, and when he drinks, he gets mean. Last night, he threatened the baby. Said she cried too much." Clara's eyes welled with tears. "I ran. I took what I could carry and I ran." The baby fussed, and Clara rocked her gently. Eli noticed bruises on her wrists, finger marks pressed into pale skin. "Why come to me?" Eli asked, his voice rough from disuse and whiskey. "You look like a man who's seen trouble," Clara said, "and survived it." A commotion outside drew her attention. Shouting voices carried through the thin walls of the saloon. Clara's face drained of color. "He's found me," she whispered. In a sudden movement, she thrust the baby toward Eli. Take her. Just for now. Please. I'll lead him away, then come back for her. Before Eli could protest, the bundle was in his arms, and Clara was pressing something else into his hand, a small pouch. There's money, she said, and a letter. If I don't come back. Her voice broke. The letter explains everything. She leaned down and pressed her lips to the baby's forehead. I love you, Lila, she whispered. Then she was gone, slipping out the back door of the saloon just as heavy boots stomped onto the porch outside. Eli looked down at the infant in his arms. Lila's eyes were open now, dark blue and somehow knowing, fixed on his face. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he'd thought long dead. The saloon doors slammed open. A broad-shouldered man with a face like a thundercloud stood in the doorway, scanning the room with murderous intent. Where is she? He demanded. Mac, behind the bar, shrugged. Who you looking for, friend? My wife, the man snarled. Brown hair, blue dress. Carrying my kid. Eli hunched over the baby, turning slightly to shield her from view. He felt her tiny hand grasp his finger, a grip surprisingly strong for something so small. Ain't seen nobody like that, Max said. The other patrons murmured in agreement. The man cursed and stormed out, the doors swinging wildly in his wake. Eli released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The baby in his arms began to cry again, a soft whimper that grew into a wail. Seems you've got yourself a situation there, Eli, Max said, approaching the table with raised eyebrows. Eli stared at the child, panic rising in his throat. I don't know the first thing about babies. Mac chuckled. Well, that one's telling you she's hungry or wet or both. He reached behind the bar and produced a small cloth. Here, and you might want to check what's in that pouch the lady gave you. Eli awkwardly shifted the baby to one arm and opened the pouch with his free hand. Inside was a folded letter, a handful of coins, and a small glass bottle with a rubber nipple. Looks like she came prepared, Mac observed. That's milk in the bottle. Won't last long without ice, though. Eli nodded, still dazed by the turn of events. He tucked the pouch into his coat and stood, cradling Lila against his chest. I need to get her somewhere quiet, he said, more to himself than to Mac. The bartender nodded. Good luck, old-timer. You're gonna need it. The ride back to Eli's cabin was tense. He kept Lila tucked inside his coat, one arm holding her secure while the other guided his horse. Every sound in the darkness made him tense, expecting Clara's husband to appear. But they reached the cabin without incident, the night quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl. The cabin was a sorry sight. One room with a sagging bed, a table with a single chair, and a small stove. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled of neglect. Eli lit a lamp and looked around with new eyes, seeing the place as it truly was. Not a home, just somewhere to pass out when the whiskey took hold. Lila began to cry again, her tiny face scrunched in discomfort. Eli placed her on the bed and unwrapped the blanket, discovering she needed changing. With clumsy hands, he cleaned her using a spare shirt torn into strips and re-wrapped her in the blanket. There now, he said, his voice uncertain. That's better, ain't it? He warmed the milk bottle near the stove and tested it on his wrist the way he vaguely remembered seeing women do. When it felt right, he sat on the edge of the bed and offered it to Lila. She took to it immediately, her eyes drifting closed as she drank. As she fed, Eli studied her face, the button nose, the wisps of dark hair, the perfect tiny fingers. Something about her reminded him of his own daughter, of the baby he'd held just a handful of times before riding away. What am I supposed to do with you? He whispered. Lila's only answer was to continue sucking contentedly on the bottle. When she finished, Eli awkwardly raised her to his shoulder and patted her back until she burped. Then, not knowing what else to do, he laid her in the center of his bed, building a barrier of blankets around her so she wouldn't roll off. Only then did he remember the letter. He pulled it from the pouch and unfolded it, holding it close to the lamp to read the neat handwriting. To whoever helps us, it began. My name is Clara Wilkins. If you're reading this, I've had to leave my daughter Lila in your care. Her father, Frank Wilkins, is a dangerous man. He wasn't always this way, but whiskey and gambling debts changed him. I fear for our lives. I've been saving money to get us to my sister in California, but Frank found my hiding place. I took what I could and ran. Please, if I don't return, take Lila to Margaret Taylor in Sacramento. She's my only family. There's money in the pouch. It's all I have. Use it to care for Lila and get her to safety. Thank you for your kindness to strangers. Clara. Eli refolded the letter and sat heavily in the chair. The responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical weight. He looked at the sleeping infant on his bed and felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him. Just till your mama comes back, he told her softly. That's all. But deep down, something told him Clara wouldn't be coming back. Days passed, then a week. Eli settled into a routine dictated by Lila's needs. He washed her clothes in the creek behind the cabin, fashioned diapers from old shirts, and rode into town for milk and supplies. The money Clara had left dwindled quickly. People stared when he carried Lila through town. Whispers followed him, the old drifter with a baby, a man who could barely take care of himself now responsible for an innocent life. Some offered help. Mrs. Peterson from the general store showed him how to properly swaddle Lila, and Doc Wilson checked her over, pronouncing her healthy despite her circumstances. You're doing right by her, Eli, the doctor said. Never would have expected it. Eli wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not. Nights were the hardest. Lila would wake crying, and Eli would pace the small cabin, rocking her and humming tunelessly until she settled. During those quiet hours, with the baby warm against his chest and the moon casting silver light through the window, memories surfaced. His wife, Sarah, her belly round with their child. The birth of their daughter, Emma. The crushing weight of responsibility that had sent him running. He'd been young then, barely 25, terrified of failing as a father. So he'd left before he could fail, convincing himself they were better off without him. Now, holding Lila, he wondered what Emma looked like. She'd be grown now, maybe with children of her own. Children who would never know their grandfather. One afternoon, as Lila napped, Eli dragged an old trunk from under the bed. He hadn't opened it in years, avoiding the reminders of his past. But something drove him to it now. Inside were the few possessions he'd carried from place to place. A pocket watch that had belonged to his father, a hunting knife, a few books. And at the bottom, wrapped in a faded bandana, a bundle of letters. Sarah had written to him for years after he left, sending the letters to his brother, who forwarded them whenever Eli stayed in one place long enough. Eventually, the letters stopped coming. Eli had never opened them, too cowardly to face the pain he'd caused. With trembling hands, he untied the string around the bundle and opened the first letter. Sarah's handwriting flowed across the page, a mixture of anger and love that made his chest ache. Emma asked about you again today. One passage read, I told her you were a good man who had to go away. I don't know if that's true anymore, Eli, but I want it to be. For her sake. Letter after letter chronicled Emma's growth. Her first steps, her first words, the way she looked for him whenever a horse passed by their farm. Sarah's tone changed over time, from bitter to resigned to something like forgiveness. The last letter was different, written in a shaky hand. I'm not well, Eli, Sarah had written. The doctor says it's consumption. Emma will go to my sister when I'm gone. I wish you had found the courage to be the man I knew you could be. I forgive you. I hope someday you forgive yourself. Tucked inside the final letter was a photograph. Emma at about 5 years old, sitting on a porch step. Her dark hair and solemn eyes struck Eli like a physical blow. She looked so much like Lila that for a moment, he couldn't breathe. A cry from the bed pulled him back to the present. Eli wiped his eyes and went to Lila, lifting her into his arms. I'm here, he murmured, the words feeling strange on his tongue. I'm here. That night, he made a decision. He wouldn't fail this child the way he'd failed his own. Whatever happened with Clara, whether she returned or not, he would protect Lila until she was safe. The next morning, Eli packed what little they needed and rode into town. He'd sell his horse and buy 2 tickets on the stagecoach to Sacramento. Clara's sister would take Lila in, give her the family she deserved. The town was unusually busy when they arrived. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, voices raised in excitement or alarm. Eli dismounted carefully, keeping Lila secure in the sling he'd fashioned across his chest. Sheriff Taylor spotted him and broke away from the crowd, his expression grim. Eli, he said, been looking for you. Eli tensed. What's happened? They found a woman's body down by the river crossing yesterday. Young, dark hair. The sheriff's eyes dropped to Lila. Thought you might know something about it. The world seemed to tilt beneath Eli's feet. Clara, he said, the name barely audible. The sheriff nodded. That's what we figured from the description. Her neck was broken. Looks like she was running from someone. Fell from the high bank in the dark. Or was pushed, Eli thought. Her husband, Frank Wilkins, the sheriff confirmed. He's been asking all over town about a woman and baby. Mean-looking fellow. Said his wife ran off, took his child. Eli's arms tightened around Lila. She was afraid of him. Said he'd hurt them. Sheriff Taylor sighed. Without witnesses, it's hard to prove anything. But Wilkins is staying at the hotel, says he's not leaving without his daughter. He gave Eli a pointed look. You planning on keeping her? I was taking her to her aunt in Sacramento, Eli said. Clara left a letter. That might help, but legally, the father has rights. The sheriff lowered his voice. Between you and me, I don't like the look of him. But my hands are tied unless he breaks the law. Eli nodded, mind racing. I understand. He's over at the hotel now, the sheriff said. Probably best if you avoid Main Street. But as Eli turned to leave, a shout rang out across the street. That's her. That's my Lila. Frank Wilkins pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with anger or drink or both. He was younger than Eli by at least 20 years, with the build of a man who worked with his hands and the eyes of someone who enjoyed causing pain. You stole my child, old man. Wilkins snarled, advancing on Eli. Eli stood his ground. Your wife asked me to protect her. Clara was confused. Hysterical. Wilkins forced a concerned expression that didn't reach his eyes. I've been worried sick about my little girl. A small crowd had gathered now, watching the confrontation with avid interest. Eli felt Lila stir against his chest, as if sensing the tension. Clara was afraid you'd hurt the baby, Eli said, loud enough for others to hear. She had bruises. Said you threatened Lila when you were drinking. Wilkins' face darkened. You calling me a liar, old man? In front of all these people. Sheriff Taylor stepped between them. That's enough. This needs to be settled proper, not in the middle of the street. There's nothing to settle, Wilkins said. That's my daughter. I'm taking her home. He reached for Lila, but Eli stepped back, one hand going to the knife at his belt. You touch her, you'll pull back a stump, he said quietly. Something in his voice made Wilkins hesitate. The sheriff sighed heavily. Both of you in my office. Now, inside the sheriff's office, Eli produced Clara's letter. Sheriff Taylor read it carefully, then handed it to the town judge, who happened to be present. Judge Porter, a thin man with spectacles and a reputation for fairness, studied the letter with a frown. This is troubling, he said finally. But without Clara here to verify it. It's just words on paper. She's dead because of him, Eli said, nodding toward Wilkins. You can't prove that, Wilkins snapped. No, the judge agreed. We can't. But this letter raises concerns about the child's welfare. He turned to Wilkins. Mr. Wilkins, do you have anyone who can speak to your character? Anyone who knows you as a father? Wilkins shifted uncomfortably. We kept to ourselves. Clara didn't like socializing. Or you kept her isolated, Eli thought. I see, the judge said. And you, Mr. Thorne? Can anyone speak to your care of the child? To Eli's surprise, several voices spoke up from the doorway, where townspeople had gathered to watch the proceedings. He's been taking good care of that baby, Mrs. Peterson said firmly. Comes in regular for milk and such. Asks questions about what she needs. Doc Wilson nodded. The child is healthy and well-tended. I checked her myself last week. Even Mac from the saloon chimed in. Eli hasn't touched a drop since that baby came into his life. Used to be my best customer. The judge considered this, then sighed. This is a difficult situation. By law, the father has primary rights to the child. However, given the concerns raised in this letter and the circumstances of the mother's death, I'm inclined to proceed with caution. He turned to Wilkins. I'm ordering a temporary arrangement. The child will remain with Mr. Thorne for 1 week while I send inquiries to verify Mrs. Wilkins' sister exists in Sacramento. If Mr. Thorne's story checks out, we'll consider what's best for the child at that time. Wilkins' face contorted with rage. You can't do that. She's mine. She's a child, not property, the judge said sharply. And I can and will do what I believe is in her best interest. 1 week, Mr. Wilkins. I suggest you use that time to demonstrate you can be a suitable father. Eli felt a wave of relief, though he knew it was temporary. As they left the sheriff's office, Wilkins caught his arm. This isn't over, old man, he hissed. That's my daughter. I'll get her back, one way or another. Eli met his gaze steadily. You can try. The week that followed was the longest of Eli's life. He barely slept, jumping at every sound outside the cabin, keeping his rifle loaded and within reach. During the day, he carried Lila everywhere, unwilling to let her out of his sight. Wilkins made his presence known in town, playing the part of the grieving husband and concerned father. He stopped drinking, dressed neatly, and spoke politely to everyone. But Eli saw the calculation in his eyes, the barely contained violence. On the 6th day, as Eli sat on the porch with Lila, a rider approached the cabin. It was Sheriff Taylor, his expression somber. Judge Porter heard back from Sacramento. He said without preamble, "Margaret Taylor exists." She confirmed Clara was her sister and that she'd been worried about her for months. Eli nodded, relief washing through him. "So Lila goes to her aunt." "That's the judge's ruling," the sheriff confirmed. "He's ordering Wilkins to surrender any claim to the child due to evidence of abuse and the suspicious circumstances of Clara's death." He paused. "Wilkins didn't take it well. Threatened to burn down the courthouse. I locked him up to cool off, but he'll be out tomorrow." "I'll be gone by then," Eli said. "Taking Lila to Sacramento first thing in the morning." The sheriff nodded. "I'll escort you to the stagecoach, just to be safe." That night, Eli packed their few belongings and sat watching Lila sleep. In just 2 weeks, she had changed his life completely. The thought of handing her over to her aunt, never seeing her again, created a hollow feeling in his chest. But he knew it was right. She deserved a family, a proper home, things he couldn't give her. Morning came with golden lights streaming through the cabin windows. Eli fed and changed Lila one last time, then secured her in the sling across his chest. As he stepped onto the porch, he paused, looking out at the land he'd called home for the past few years. It had never felt like home until Lila came into his life. From his pocket, he took a small wooden horse he'd carved during the long nights of watching over her. He placed it on the porch railing, a reminder of the brief time when he'd found purpose again, when he'd been needed. The stagecoach was scheduled to leave at noon. Eli arrived early, the sheriff at his side. There was no sign of Wilkins, but Eli remained vigilant, one hand near his gun as they waited. As the stagecoach pulled up, a woman approached them, Mrs. Peterson from the general store. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said, smiling sadly, "and give Lila something to remember us by." She handed Eli a small quilt, carefully stitched with bright colors. "Made it myself." Eli took it, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. You're doing the right thing," she said, patting his arm. "Even though I know it's breaking your heart." Eli couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He simply nodded. The stagecoach driver called for passengers. Eli turned to board when a shout rang out from down the street. "Thorne!" Frank Wilkins stood there, a rifle in his hands, face twisted with rage. Before anyone could react, he fired. The bullet whistled past Eli's ear, splintering the wood of the stagecoach. Sheriff Taylor drew his gun, but Wilkins was already taking aim again. Time seemed to slow as Eli turned, shielding Lila with his body. He heard the second shot, felt the impact high on his shoulder, the burning pain that followed. Despite the wound, Eli drew his revolver and fired back. His shot caught Wilkins in the chest. The man staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face before he crumpled to the ground. The next few minutes passed in a blur. The sheriff took Wilkins' pulse, then shook his head. Doc Wilson appeared, helping Eli into his office while someone held Lila. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder, missing anything vital. As the doctor bandaged him, Eli kept his eyes on Lila, who was being rocked by Mrs. Peterson.